Welcome to my tutorial on how to knit a two-color brioche swatch. So this is the swatch that we're going to be learning how to make today, and I'm just going to run through the materials you'll need to do this. You'll need two colors of contrast worsted weight yarn. I'm using a really high contrast just so it's easier and you can see the anatomy of brioche. You don't need a whole lot to make this swatch, so feel free to use scraps or anything you have lying around. I will be using a few stitch markers today just to mark this garter stitch border and in between the brioche sections. You'll need a pair of scissors just to cut any ends, and then I'm going to be using a pair of US 5 needles on a 24-inch cord. You just need enough to be able to slip back and forth. I do recommend using circular needles because there are portions where you have to slide the work and you can't really do that on straight needles, but you can use a long double-pointed needle depending on what you have at your disposal. But I prefer to knit brioche on a circular needle. Truly, the needle size does not matter. Use whatever is appropriate for your yarn. There will also be a link in the description box below to my Ravelry shop where you can download the written instructions for this brioche swatch, which I really recommend going and printing those out before you begin the video. So then you can pause the video in specific sections and have the written instructions to read from while you work on your swatch. I did take the liberty of cutting out a lot of the finishing rows and just more of the tedious work on this swatch so that the video isn't too long and just shows you all the skills that you need to know. So I highly recommend going and downloading that and having it as a reference while you work on your swatch. So with that being said, let's get into knitting this swatch. So to begin, we're going to do a German twisted cast on and cast on 31 stitches. So you can use any cast on method that you prefer. I am not going to be showing you how to do a German twisted cast on in this specific video, but I can link one in the description below that I have made previously. But again, it doesn't really matter what cast on you're using. Just cast on in your favorite method. So now that we've casted on our 31 stitches, we are going to knit our garter stitch border. So this border is 4 garter stitch rows, and one garter stitch row is composed of knitting across the row, turning our work, and knitting back. And that's one garter stitch row. So you'll be doing 8 plain knit rows to make 4 garter stitch rows. And I'm going to knit my garter stitch rows and I'll check back in with you when I'm finished. So I've finished my 31 stitches of German twisted cast on, and then I've proceeded to knit 4 rows of garter stitch. So to begin, I grab 2 little light bulb stitch markers, and my garter stitch is just going to be 4 stitches. So these 4 stitches are just always going to be knits no matter what side of the work that you're on. So knit 4 stitches and then place your marker. And now we can start on the brioche. So brioche always has a setup row, and the rows are split into row 1A and row 1B. Row 1A is going to be with our main color, and row 1B is going to be with our contrast color. So to begin row 1A, we are going to knit our first stitch. Then we are going to bring our working yarn in front. We're going to slip this next stitch purlwise, and then we're just going to knit the next stitch. So when we do that, it's going to create a yarn over the slip stitch, and that's exactly what we want. We want each slip stitch to have a little buddy so it doesn't get lonely. So yarn forward, slip, then knit to create your yarn over the slip stitch, yarn forward, slip, and knit. So the only tools you need to be able to do brioche is a knit stitch, a purl stitch, slip stitch, and a yarn over. It's truly that easy. You just have to be very methodical and slow when you first start, because it is a different motion than we're used to knitting. So we just knit a stitch, so yarn over, slip one, knit, yarn over, slip one, knit. So yarn forward, slip, knit, and then you're just going to do that to the last 4 stitches on your swatch. And if I'm going too fast at any point, please feel free to pause the video and just read the directions and go at your own pace. That's the wonderful part about doing a YouTube video, is you can pause, you can rewind, and you can go back. Now that we've knit our last stitch in our brioche section, we're going to place another little light bulb stitch marker and just knit 4, which is our garter stitch edge. And then we're going to just leave the yarn over here, and we're going to slide our work back to the other needle. So that's a big thing with brioche, is you have to work one row twice in both colors. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our contrast color and we're going to join that into our work. So for me, my contrast color is this blue, and then we're going to knit 4 for our garter stitch edging, 3, 4. We're going to slip our marker, and then we're going to bring our yarn forward, slip this stitch, yarn over, and brioche purl. So a brioche purl is when you're purling a stitch with its yarn over. So again, now our yarn is already in front. We're going to slip this stitch, bring our yarn from the front of the needle around back to the front, brioche purl that purl stitch with its yarn over. Yarn's already in front. Bring your yarn around the needle to the front, slip this stitch. So sometimes I like to think about it as I know I need to purl the next stitch, but my yarn's just not in the right place to do that, because then that would create a little loop in front of that stitch, which isn't what we want. So we have to go around it and then purl. So you can almost think of it as when you're on the highway and you're behind a really slow car, you go into the left lane and pass it and then go back in front of it. So we're going to slip past this stitch on the highway and brioche purl. That's just a little metaphor I like to use, but everyone's going to come up with their own, and I really encourage you to think about it, and whatever works for you, use that. So brioche purl, slip, yarn over, brioche purl, slip, yarn over, brioche purl. So this last stitch was a knit stitch. So what we're going to do with our yarn in front, we're going to just slip our stitch marker, and then we're just going to knit the next stitch. And you can see that created a yarn over on that stitch by just leaving the yarn in front and then knitting the next stitch. So then we're just going to knit 4, 3, 4. So now that both of our tails are on the same side, we can turn our work around. And that was the setup row for row 1A and 1B. So we're going to move on to setup row 2A on the wrong side. So we're going to be using our main color for this particular row. So it's always going to go main color, contrast color. So what we're going to do is we're going to knit, and you can give a little tug on your contrast color just to tighten everything up. So knit 4 for our garter stitch edging, then we're going to slip. So we see that this is a slipped knit. Well, on this side it's a slipped knit stitch, on this side it's a slipped purl stitch with a yarn over. So on this side we're going to brioche purl that stitch with its yarn over. Just make sure the yarn over doesn't get caught. Then we're going to slip this stitch, yarn over, brioche purl, slip, yarn over, brioche purl. It's very rhythmic to do brioche, and it'll really become your new stockinette once you've practiced it a lot. So the yarn's already in front, slip, yarn over, brioche purl, slip, yarn over, brioche purl, slip, yarn over, brioche purl, slip, yarn over, brioche purl. Very rhythmic, doesn't really change. And you can already see the brioche in one row is starting to really take shape, and it's such a beautiful texture and a fun way to play with color. It's really as simple as just knits, purls, a slip stitch, and a yarn over. That's it. But I do recommend really taking it slowly when you first begin, because you have so much muscle memory from knitting that slip and yarn over really catches you off guard at first. So just take it slow, be nice to yourself, and come up with some fun little metaphors that work for you. So now that we've brioche purled our last stitch, just slip our marker, bring our yarn in back, and just knit these 4 stitches. So now the tails of our yarn are not on the same side, so we know that we need to slip to the other side of the work. So back to where we started for setup row 2B on the wrong side, we are going to knit 4 stitches for our garter stitch edging. And then with our yarn in front, we're going to slip, and then we are going to yarn over by knitting into this next stitch. So yarn forward, slip, knit into the next stitch. So you can see how this slip stitch has its little yarn over buddy, it's not lonely, and it has a friend. Also, one thing you may notice is that you do a knit, a purl row, and then another purl row, and then a knit row, a lot like Kitchener stitch. If you're familiar with grafting the ends of toes, it's a very similar rhythm slash pattern. So slip, brioche knit, the knit stitch with its yarn over, yarn in front, slip, and then brioche knit, yarn forward, slip, brioche knit, yarn forward, slip, brioche knit, slip, brioche knit, yarn forward, slip, brioche knit, yarn forward, slip, brioche knit, yarn forward, slip, brioche knit. Like I said, the great part about this video, if at any point I'm going too fast, just pause, take a deep breath, look at your directions, and just see where you are in your swatch. And the wonderful part about starting on a swatch, it does not matter if you have to rip it out. If you make a mistake, it's not like you just cast on 150 stitches for a shawl or sweater. It's just 30 stitches you can really easily rip out. So it's very good when you're learning to start off knowing that you will make mistakes. And that is 100% a part of the learning process, because this is a new skill and you already have so much muscle memory that it's challenging to train your brain to do something else. So yarn forward, knit, brioche knit, and then yarn forward, and then we're just going to knit our last 4 stitches. And now we are done our setup row. So now for our pattern repeat, we just have 2 more rows to get through, and you will have all the skills you need to do a simple 2-color brioche swatch. And if anyone wants some tutorials on brioche increases and decreases, I'd be happy to film those if there are interest. So please leave a comment down below if you would like to see more brioche tutorials. But we're going to start off with our main color. We're going to knit 4 stitches. And now we are on the pattern repeat part of the section, which is row 1A. So we're going to knit our first stitch, yarn forward, slip, knit. So yarn forward, slip, brioche knit, knitting the stitch with its yarn over, slip. Oh, I didn't grab all of my stitch when I slipped. There we go. So you can really see the brioche starting to take shape, hopefully. And by using these 2 contrasting colors, it's nice and simple to see the anatomy of the stitches. So it's actually, brioche is 2 stockinette pieces of fabric knit back to back, which is how you get this really fun texture. And brioche is extremely airy and just an amazing fabric to use. I love to incorporate it in shawls just because it's so nice and squishy, but it's also very light because of all the air that's in it from the 2 pieces being knit back to back. So last couple stitches, yarn forward, slip, knit, and then slip our little marker and then just knit 4. So now our tails are on opposite sides of the work. So we are going to slip our work so that we can go on row 1B with our contrast color. So knit 4, slip your marker, yarn forward, slip the first stitch, yarn over, brioche purl, slip, yarn over, brioche purl. So like I said, you are stuck behind a really slow car in traffic, you're going to move to the other lane and then go in front of that car to brioche purl. So slip, brioche purl, slip, yarn over, brioche purl. And once you get really good at brioche, it's going to be hard for you to slow down and think of all the steps because it's just going to become such second nature to you, but you have to give it time. So the really great part of this swatch is you can just keep going and going as long as you feel is necessary for you to be good at practicing the stitch. You can also just knit some garter rows in the middle of the swatch and stop the brioche in order to restart the brioche and practice on the setup rows, because I think those are the most tricky rows when you're getting started off when everything's just in one color. So now that our tails are on the same side, we can turn our work and then we'll come in and we'll start row 2A in our main color. And to think we are pretty much done. We've learned all the skills that we need to know to be successful at knitting brioche. And then the rest is just going to be practicing. So you're going to knit 4, slip 1, brioche knit. Oh, I made a mistake. We are on row 2A, so I'm in a brioche purl. Slip 1, yarn over, brioche purl, slip 1, yarn over, brioche purl. So you can see that even been doing brioche for quite a while, and I still make a mistake every once in a while, and that's perfectly normal. We're all learning more about knitting every time we start a new project, and it just wouldn't be fun if you knew everything. So again, give yourself room and forgive yourself for making those mistakes, and just catch it, go back a couple stitches, or if you need to, just rip out the swatch and start over. Like I said, it's no shame in having to start over. I have been very frustrated with brioche several times and ripped out entire projects because I made a mistake and I didn't know how to go back and fix it. But the more you practice, the better you're going to become. So, brioche purl, slip our marker, yarn back, knit 4 stitches. Okay, so now tails on opposite ends, slip, and then we are going to knit 4 in our contrast color on row 2B. So we are going to yarn forward, slip, brioche knit. Yarn forward, slip, brioche knit. Yarn forward, slip, brioche knit. So you're just going to continue this pattern of rows 1A and B and rows 2A and B until you think the swatch is long enough and that you've practiced enough, and then I will show you how I like to bind off. And then you can watch the part of the video on how to finish your swatch. So, last stitch, we're going to yarn forward, slip, and then slip our marker and just knit these last 4 stitches. So in those couple rows we just did, you learned all the skills you need to be able to knit this simple brioche swatch. So again, I would recommend printing out the handout just so you have it in written instructions in front of you in case you get lost, so that you can just refer back to that. But knit the swatch as long as you think is necessary for you to practice this skill, and then you can come join me again in the video and I will just run through ways that you can bind off. I'm going to use another garter stitch edging just to mirror the swatch, but you don't need to do anything special to bind off in brioche. You can just bind off completely normally, just making sure you bind off the brioche stitches with their yarn overs, and it's totally fine. So I'll check back in when this swatch is a little bit bigger. So as you can see, I've knit up to the part where I'm going to finish off my swatch. So to do that, I'm going to cut my contrast color, just give myself a tail so I can weave that in later. And then I am going to use my main color to finish off the swatch. So I'm going to finish with another garter stitch border, just like how we started. But I'm just going to go over how to transition between brioche and garter stitch, which is super simple. So we're going to knit 4 in our garter stitch edging, slip the stitch marker off, and then we're just going to do basically a brioche knit and knit the stitch with its stitch and its yarn over, and then just knit the purls and just continue to work across the row in that pattern until you have 4 garter stitch rows. And I'm going to check back in once I have my 4 garter stitch rows, and I will show you how I am going to bind off this swatch. So now I am ready to bind off my brioche swatch. I'm going to be using the main color, and I'm just going to do a super simple loose bind off. So I'm just going to knit one more, pass that stitch over, knit one, pass that stitch over all the way to the end. I'm just going to bind off loosely so there's no tension issues in between my bind off and my cast off row. Of course, you can use whatever bind off you prefer, but I'm just going to finish up this bind off and then I will show you the finished swatch. So now that I am at my last stitch, I'm just going to cut my yarn, pull my needle out, and then pull the tail through that last stitch just to tighten it up. So here is my finished brioche swatch. So this is the side that would be considered the right side of the work since we are working with the main color, and this is the wrong side. As you can see, this is such a fun texture. It's really squishy and an amazing way to play with color. I hope that you found this video really helpful and that this gave you the tools to confidently make a simple two-color brioche swatch. Truly, this is the foundation of brioche, and everything beyond learning this is relatively simple once you know all of the basics. So I hope that this gives you the confidence to try some brioche patterns that you have fallen in love with, and thank you very much for watching my video. Also, if you make your own brioche swatch, please tag me on Instagram with it. I would love to see your work and what colors you chose. It would really make my day. So you can tag me at makers_knitting on Instagram.